We all know there are a million different ways to make a living, but on this show, we are curious about those businesses that you might not know about. We're going to take a deep dive every week and talk to a successful person in their field to learn about how they got their start and how they continue to make it in their space. Join me and learn more about the business of. Welcome back to the business of, and today we're talking about the business of craft cocktails. We have April Wachtel here from Cheeky Cocktails, and she is going to tell us all about how she started Cheeky Cocktails. So you've been in the industry for a very long time. How did you decide to come up with Cheeky Cocktails?
So I think with entrepreneurial stories, you always want to have like one sort of glimmer of like, this is the aha moment, and then then I built an empire, and that is not at all what my story was. I've been in food, beverage, hospitality for 25 years. I kind of came up through bars and restaurants in Boston, and then when I moved to New York in 2011, became a brand ambassador of Bacardi rum, started teaching cocktail classes, eventually became a consultant for Diageo, and then I've taught over 5,000 students in my in-person classes, and another 7,000 in my online classes how to make drinks. So
wow.
All of these experiences informed what ultimately became Cheeky, but something I always like to share is, again, this is like a meandering story. I started another business called Swig and Swallow before Cheeky. It was a service company, then it became a CPG company, and then I was like, this is not working, I've got to take it apart. So it's been this sort of like long rolling, evolving story, but ultimately launched Cheeky in 2020 in the beginning of COVID, completely accidentally. And it's been growing.
Were you planning on launching it already and it just happened to coincide with 2020?
Yeah. So basically what happened was 2019 was a really challenging year for my business, Swig and Swallow. And I was having a lot of doubts about the product and the direction of the business. And I had just this laundry list of things that I needed to fix. And so I decided, you know what, I'm going to take it apart. I'm going to put it back together. I allowed myself a few months to get some perspective on, is this something I even care about anymore? And the answer was yes. And so I was like, this time I'm going to do it the right way. And the right way was taking my time doing it as opposed to always being in a rush. Because like from day one, and again, I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs who come from a similar background as I do. But, I think a lot of entrepreneurs come in being like, I don't want to take another job. I want to make money doing this other thing. And I didn't know that with a product business like this, you don't just make money from the start. You've got to spend money first and then you get money.
Yes.
So that was, it was an evolving process. I decided 2019 to pull it apart, decided take my time. 2020 in April was going to slowly launch the business. I've been working with a branding agency on the packaging and brand identity. And then when COVID hit, March trickling into April, I was just like, I've got to move faster. And so just went back to my old ways of just like go as quickly as possible. And ultimately, because I had now done it before, I was able to get up to critical mass. We grew exponentially over 2020 into 2021. And we've just been really working on building out the requisite structures such that we can actually start scaling without any big breaking points, hopefully, in the near future.
Awesome. So your hero product is an espresso martini mixer. Did you see that coming from an industry perspective?
Well, it's an interesting question. So Cheeky, our products themselves, they're bar quality syrups and juices for the home and bar. The initial premise was strictly citruses, so 100% lemon juice, 100% lime juice, and then syrups, like classic syrups that are found in bars made with bar specs, meaning that if you go to any craft cocktail bar around the world, they're going to have these exact same syrups in their bars. So that was the core idea. Then we had a few products, so like our honey ginger syrup, our cranberry lemon syrup, that are thoughtful solutions for really high demand cocktails, like the penicillin cocktail, like the cosmopolitan cocktail. And the espresso martini, it was a big cocktail, 80s, 90s.
Yeah, totally.
And then it's made a comeback.
Right.
So ultimately, the launch of this was seeing it make a comeback and saying, well, honestly, they're kind of a pain to make. And a big problem that I saw as a bartender was getting that fluffy, foamy crema on the surface of the cocktail if you didn't have fresh espresso. That was always a problem at a bar, and it's a big problem in the home. And so I was like, maybe I can launch something that solves that problem. And so the espresso syrup, which we have in front of us, it is a very special cold brew concentrate that we source from a company called Cafe Integral. They source single origin beans from Nicaragua, and they roast in our building in Brooklyn.
Oh, cool.
So it's that, cane sugar, and then gum arabic, which is just a natural emulsifier. And so the combination of these elements, not only does it just make a great shot of espresso, or mix it with oat milk or milk, whatever, but it makes a phenomenal espresso martini with only 2 ingredients. So your spirit of choice, typically vodka, but your spirit of choice, and then 1 ounce of our espresso syrup. Wow. So yeah, I mean, it ultimately, it was a reaction to it picking back up in demand, but also knowing like this has always been a problem and maybe we can solve it.
Very cool. So how did you decide to come up with Cheeky? You had Swig and Swallow, which was kind of an iteration of this, but how did you decide to hone in on doing the at-home syrups that had bar specs? Like where did that come from, that inspiration?
So I'm going to try to answer this in a comprehensive way, but also like really, really get to the actual question. So I think a bigger question for myself was, what do I want to do with my life, and what is the opportunity that I see in the market? And so when you look at the U.S. spirits market, it's $75 to $80 billion in annual revenue. 30% of those sales occur in bars, restaurants, hotels, which is called the on-premise, and then 70% of those sales occur with the consumer. So, like meaning in retail where they can't make these cocktails as well as they do in bars. So I like being able to help people in the first place. Yeah. It was really a big thing being a cocktail instructor to help people feel empowered about their own abilities and being able to share hospitality and these amazing drinks with friends and family and feel very proud of what they've made. So there was like a personal attachment to that. And then again, when you look at the business opportunity as well, what a cool thing, and what a really massive business potential there is, obviously in that segment of the space. And it's also the hardest one to reach in a lot of ways. So, I mean, ultimately, I think a lot of businesses like ours, if you start bootstrapped, you're starting small. And one of the easiest things to do to get started is selling in your own store and, reaching at-home consumers across the country. And then oftentimes later is when distribution really occurs. And that's where you need to focus on a more specific local, regional, or potentially eventually national distribution strategy. So for us, it resonated with me personally. It made sense in terms of like building a brand from the ground up. And then ultimately it was just like, let's test and learn at a sort of smaller level, and then we can build that out and increase it and ideally grow bigger on the things that are working.
And do you feel like the pandemic, with people being in lockdown when you guys were first starting, helped to increase awareness for your brand? Or do you feel like it was harder because you launched during this time when people were at home?
No, it was ultimately 100% the former. Okay. And people talk about how timing is so important to these things. And I can absolutely guarantee we probably had the equivalent of, if not millions, hundreds of thousands of dollars of free advertising, because all of a sudden there were eyeballs on our space and intent to buy, and the fact that we were a new brand launching at the same time, and being that the concept was replicating these cocktails that you have in bars, your favorite cocktails in bars, in the home. I mean, there could not have been any better timing in that way. On the flip side, what's very interesting is we all know, again, everyone's familiar with the supply chain issues that were occurring.
Right.
When you look at co-manufacturing, like sourcing raw ingredients, getting line time at co-manufacturers, really difficult to do in that time. And so it was very helpful that we had already had the facility left over from the old business to get started with and launch the product and move it that way.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
We are going to take a quick commercial break, and we are going to come back and learn more about Cheeky cocktails. Welcome back to The Business Of, and today we are talking about the business of craft cocktails with April Wachtel from Cheeky Cocktails. So you've been an entrepreneur before. Can you tell us about a time for Cheeky that something's worked out better than you anticipated? I know as an entrepreneur, like you're always taking risks, but tell us about a time where a risk worked out better than you anticipated.
Yeah. I think something that worked out better than I anticipated was Swig and Swallow, my previous product line. It was HPP'd mixers, meaning they had to be refrigerated. So it preserves flavor and nutritional content better than any other pasteurization process on the market. And so coming from the craft cocktail world, I thought people are going to want the as close to fresh ingredients as they possibly can have. And while I think that is true, I think the consumer cares about a lot of other things more. Convenience being a big piece of it. Consumers don't have unlimited refrigerator space in their homes, and stores don't either. So I had a lot of reservations about taking that product, refrigerated product, and making it shelf stable. But I also knew for the long-term success of the business, this is where people look in the category. Like if you're in a retailer, you look on the,
shelf right next to where the alcohol is. You're like, oh, this goes with this. I got this.
And it's not in refrigeration, as we know. So that was a big, honestly, that was probably the biggest decision that I made in taking Swig and Swallow apart and putting back together as Cheeky, and wasn't sure how it was going to go. And, in particular, because I come from the trade, like within craft cocktails, I come from the industry. People in that segment are very, I would say, choosy about the types of products that they endorse. What has been very interesting is since switching from Swig and Swallow to Cheeky, we've had huge trade support and bartenders being some of our larger clients recommending us, purchasing us, and recommending us to their clients across the country. So that was a total surprise to me. I thought bartenders would just say, anything that's not freshly squeezed a la minute is not going to be, palatable to me, but it's proven to be the opposite. So, happy with it. Very happy.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, it's great that you're not only within the industry getting recognition, but also consumers, to your point, consumers want the convenience. They want to be able to not have to go to the refrigerated section or whatever to find a product that's going to pair well with whatever alcohol they're trying to consume at home.
It's that, and then the other piece of it too, and this is something that we didn't know until we were in Whole Foods on a refrigerated shelf, is the other piece is what you're stealing shelf space from is a very quickly turning product, which is like orange juice or whatever, like green juice that people are walking in and they're just like, I just want my dose of green juice for the day. So that from a distribution and convincing retailers to take you on and keep you have to be better performing than these other products. You have to be more productive
and higher. It's a very competitive space in that respect.
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, conversely, entrepreneurship is always about learning things, whether it's good or bad. Can you tell us about a time you took a risk that turned into a learning opportunity? Because, everything's a learning opportunity, not always a bad thing, but just, you learn some things about.
Yeah. Well, so yes, everything, always learn. So I made a decision, and again, I think a lot of business owners, I think this resonates with a lot of business owners, is things were going very, very well, 2020 for us, 2021, and I made some large financial investments in the business in 2021 based on our growth, and people's buying patterns changed. And so ultimately we had been bootstrapped to this point. I waited too long to start raising money, and we came very close to running out of money. And this is obviously a very I think a lot of business owners wouldn't share this information like on an interview that's going to be online forever.
Right.
But no, I think it's really important to share these things, because now that I've learned that lesson of like how stressful and terrible it is to nearly run out of money when you have a staff and you've got financial obligations and you've got all of these vendor relationships. At this point, I learned the lesson so well that my hope and expectation is to have over 10 options for how to finance different pieces of the business, whether it's, factoring, different solutions for working capital, whether it's giving away more equity in the business, getting additional debt. There's a lot of different things that I have learned since then to hopefully future-proof the business as much as we can. But that was, it was honestly, it was very scary. Would not recommend it to anyone. So yeah, but again, came out of it very, I think, positive and smarter.
And how did you learn? I think that, to your point, this is not something that a lot of entrepreneurs talk about. Yeah. They don't talk about the journey to getting more money into the business so that they can continue to grow. How did you learn about the different ways you can raise capital?
Yeah.
Do you have a business degree? Clearly you know a lot about cocktails and you're a very smart woman. But how did you kind of navigate that, which feels like a very, entirely different world?
Yeah. So while I was running Swig and Swallow, it was probably about 4 years. Again, not a very successful product, but in terms of my learning, huge. And so I did a tremendous amount of research. So I actually spoke to a couple of investors very early Swig and Swallow days where it's very cringeworthy looking back on it. I'd be like, oh my God, I would not have given you money either. But I realized from the start that there's a specific, not only language that you have to use in these types of conversations, but there's a whole understanding of actually how money functions in the business. And so I think very early on in my Swig and Swallow journey, I realized that I didn't know any of that. And so I just did as much research as I could. I spoke to a ton of different entrepreneurs. I think a really low-hanging fruit for anyone trying to learn about this, Shark Tank is a great place to start because it's fun and it's also learning and it's also understanding about different businesses. But ultimately, tons of podcasts, tons of conversations with entrepreneurs, and I'm happy to give some recommendations for that as well for anyone who wants to know more. Yeah,
that's awesome. Because I think it's a part of the business where people don't talk about it, but it's a huge part of being an entrepreneur is being able to get that capital so you can keep the business going. Yeah. And not everybody goes to business school or has an MBA or has people who are entrepreneurs to learn from. You have to go and seek those people out to really be able to learn the different avenues you can go through, because there are a lot of different ways you can. And I love watching Shark Tank personally.
So good.
It is so good. And I've learned so much. That edutainment.
Yeah.
They've got you hooked.
Totally.
For sure. Well, we're going to take another quick commercial break and we'll be right back with April. Welcome back to the Business of, and today we're talking about the business of craft cocktails with April Wachtel of Cheeky Cocktails. And before the break, we were talking about some of the things that you've learned as starting this not being your first company, but your second. And I'd love to dive a little bit deeper into the finance aspect, because this is something that a lot of entrepreneurs, don't necessarily talk about, and not everybody understands when you're starting your own business, whatever the size may be, that most likely you're going to have to figure out financing.
Yes.
Not everybody has, a cool $1 million just in the bank to start a company.
Totally.
And they cost a lot of money, and you aren't making money typically right off the bat.
Yeah.
Even if you do the projections, and it seems like you are going to.
Yes.
So, tell us a little bit more about on your journey to get financing.
Yep. And
how you learned, not only from podcasts, but how you went and dove deep into this part of the business.
Yes. So, so I think at the beginning, a lot of entrepreneurs in this type of business will bootstrap, depending on what type of business. Like if you're trying to build Amazon, maybe you don't bootstrap from the start. Maybe you have, maybe you are able to get some financing initially. But I think particularly in my industry, it's very uncommon to get an institutional investor like a venture capitalist or somebody who invests professionally to give you monies. In the tech world, maybe people invest in an idea, but that's not typically how it works with a CPG, consumer packaged good brand. So bootstrapped it initially, something a lot of business owners know is you don't really have a lot of access to debt for a couple of years. So after a couple of years in business, then you can have better access to SBA-backed loans, for example. And that 2-year window when you're starting out is the most dangerous. Most businesses go out of business in the first 2 years.
Yeah.
And this is actually something that's of a lot of personal interest to me moving forward. After we sell Cheeky, when we're very successful, I do really want to get deeper into this because there are so many brilliant people with amazing ideas and a lot of tenacity who just don't have access to capital. And it's truly a really big problem. For example, with venture capital, it's less than 3% of venture capital funding goes to women on an annual basis. And then an even smaller fragment goes to minority founders, whether male or female. So anyway, very interesting topic to me. So as I mentioned, I listened to a ton of different podcasts, like different ones with investors, like the 20-Minute VC. How I Built This is an amazing podcast on NPR with Roz. I was actually on the Pitch podcast years ago. It's no longer going, but it was a really like Shark Tank style podcast where business owners pitch to a small panel of investors and they get live feedback. And loved that show and learned a ton from that show because it is a little bit more realistic, honestly, than Shark Tank is. Which again, it's just good to have a lot of different touch points. And then ultimately it was, I just realized I'm like, okay, to make this business viable and interesting to investors and for me to even understand what I'm doing, I need a financial model. And for a financial model, truly, you need a little bit of data. And so we built the financial model. I had a friend who's a ex-hedge fund partner, grew and sold her first beverage business, has launched a second one. She helped me build this out. And it's 3 years of, projections and assumptions about the performance of the business. And with that, I think in my own, evolution of building Cheeky, that has been the greatest tool to support these conversations and my own learning because it's broken down. And again, I'm just going to lay this out for people who are less familiar. We have, monthly, projected revenue and expenses. We'll tweak this and track this on a monthly basis. And that funnels up into projected revenues for the next 3 years. And so this is really helpful because I think when we're seeing what's working or what's not working with the business, we can then adapt. And it allows you to budget and do other things that are very important for businesses. But I think, again, having a way to measure your performance within the business is super, super, super critical, even if it's just like a fundamental, like top line, summary or metric for yourself. So I've been going on forever, but that's
No, I think that's really interesting. And I think, in any business, and we talk here on ROI TV about the importance of budgeting and planning in your personal finance, but I think it is also super important when you're doing a business. And even more so, especially when you're starting out a business, because you have to make a lot of assumptions. You make a lot of projections. If you're in a consumable goods arena, you have to project. You have to be able to supply those orders as they come in. And sometimes it's more expensive to do that than you anticipated, or you don't get the orders come in that you thought. So how do you track how you're going and continue to grow? So that's really, smart. How your friend who helped you with that, they were instrumental in the fact because they had previous experience in the space, or like how did they really help you refine what your model looks like?
Right. Well, so I think the initial pieces, and this I think has probably come clear in some of this conversation, but I do not have a business background. I come from some industry and product expertise. I mean, that is my strength there. I'm also very strategic, but that does not mean that I understood the fundamentals of accounting. Right. So that was something that I had to learn along the way. And some of these things you can pick up as in all the ways that I've mentioned. And some of these things I really think you need to manipulate the information yourself to be able to kind of like feel out the inside of this like box that you're in. Like black box is getting very dark sounding, but truly it is like we were trying to figure out the shape of the business and like the identity of the business and the brand from being inside of it. It's like a living, breathing organism. And so that was, we had a set of assumptions at the beginning, and those assumptions have mostly stayed true, but some have changed for sure. And so it was her providing the the financial rigor, meaning like this is how a business works, and this is like you need your revenues to exceed your expenses. Like and of course I'm teasing a little bit,
but still.
But that was hugely important. And then the other piece is because she has, she had worked with spirits distributors, and now she's working with more traditional non-alc and grocery distributors. She knows the margins that they need to take at various parts, and was able to say, okay, when we were talking about cost of goods, I think we've left this thing out, for example. So the expertise helped there too.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. I mean, we shared before we got on camera is that in my own life, I do a lot of wholesaling. Like that's what I do. I'm a buyer. And so it is very interesting when you're having conversations with brands and they haven't quite figured out that their cost of goods for wholesale needs to be less than what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
And so that's always a fun conversation.
Yes.
In real time.
Yeah. You should watch this episode.
Right? Exactly. I might send it to a couple people. Well, it sounds like you have really good financial footing now, and Cheeky is off to a great start. Where do you guys see yourself going in the future? Like, what's next for Cheeky?
Yeah. So there's two different things that I'm working towards. So one is we've got some very aggressive financial goals. And that is, I do think with our particular product, it is important that we grow very quickly. As far as we know, we are the only people doing this very specific thing that we're doing, which is, again, these actual syrups and juices that are replicas of exactly what you have in bars. I don't know of another brand that does that.
So, sorry, and just to like interject for somebody who's not in the industry, bar specs, what does that mean? Like, explain that a little bit more for me.
So that means, let's just say that you order, a whiskey sour in a bar. That is made with whiskey, lemon, simple syrup, and then sometimes egg white, depending on the bar. The simple syrup in every bar around the world, every decent bar around the world has a 1-to-1 simple syrup. It's equal parts sugar and water. That's just like the most basic, simplest of all the syrups.
Okay.
But there's all of these different syrups that have these specific specs. And if the spec is off, if it's watery, then the cocktail is going to be imbalanced. And this is something, if you're a consumer looking at recipes online and you see a recipe for a whiskey sour, margarita, cosmopolitan, whatever, penicillin, any paper plane, any of these cocktails, you will see that the syrup specs are spelled out in the recipe for that reason. Tough to communicate quickly. Yeah. And so we're trying to stray actually a little bit away from like highlighting that in every conversation. But these are truly authentic replicas of what you find in bars. And that is why it's important, because again, all the recipes that you use will be totally out of whack if the specs are wrong.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yes. Yeah, of course.
Okay, so to go back to what Cheeky is going to be doing in the future.
Yes. So aggressive growth like this, maybe not quite like this, but no, aggressive growth goals, which is very, very exciting. Mm-hmm. And then another aspect of the brand actually is I've been honestly very concerned about leaning into the full extent to the humorous side of this. Mm-hmm. We've always wanted to be approachable, but because we have a lot of large corporate customers, I have been, I think, a little bit hesitant to like full on go into humor, and really fleshing out that humorous brand voice is, I think, going to be mission critical to this next phase. And honestly is a ton of fun. We have a lot of fun, like internal conversations about just like stupid, funny stuff we want to do that I think honestly will just make.
Well, the brand name is Cheeky, so
exactly,
it's tongue in cheek.
Exactly,
yeah, it totally makes sense.
Yeah,
I like that.
But yeah, I'm very excited about that as well, because again, I think it's just humor. Like I don't know, yeah. I think it'll introduce us to the right people and keep those people around. So
yeah, I mean, I think humor is one of those things where it's such a unifying factor when it doesn't matter what level or who you are, people like to laugh.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, some people probably don't,
yeah.
But I'm not friends with those people. But I think that it's great. And when you have a product that aligns with that and can speak that language, I think that's great. I'm so excited to see what's next for you guys.
Yes, me too.
Well, thank you so much for coming onto the Business of. This was wonderful to learn more about Cheeky Cocktails and your story. I think You have lots of growth and exciting
Yeah.
things coming your way.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks.
Cheers.